Alright, we are going to try something new today, soil blocking. In this method, instead of using containers to hold the soil, we make little cubes of soil which is compacted in order to start the seeds. This method is supposed to help the seedlings with stronger roots and less transplant shock, but let us see if I can pull it off. First, let us understand what soil blocking is. As I mentioned before, soil blocking is a method of starting seeds without containers. For this method, we would need a special tool. This is a mold with which we press the soil and make compacted cubes of soil where we start the seeds, and the cube should hold together itself just with the right moisture and the pressure that we apply. According to experienced gardeners, this method is supposed to have a lot of advantages, which convinced me to try this out today. First one, of course, is avoid the use of plastic. This is a big plus for me because every year I hoard a lot of plastic containers for sowing seeds the next year. If this works, I can get rid of that, and of course it is good for the environment, and there will be less microplastic that is entering into the soil. I can't say there will be no microplastic because I still use some plastic materials for gardening, like the scooper here, which I could totally get rid of. But yeah, this is something that I have. I never want to use it. And the trays which I use to place the soil blocks. So there are still a couple of plastic materials that I use, but eventually I want to reach at a point where I don't use plastic at all for the gardening. Once I figure this method out, I'll find alternatives for the others too. The second advantage is that it saves space. Here I have sown a lot of seeds in just one tray using the soil blocks. To sow the same number of seeds in the round plastic containers that I have would definitely take a lot more space. Even though my seed starting setup with the Growlight is in the basement, I still feel the clutter every year holding on to a lot of plastic containers. So this is a big plus for me. This method is supposed to give us healthier plants, and this is because the seedlings air prone themselves. If you're growing a seedling in this pot, for example, the root will start forming and they'll go down deep until it reaches the walls of the container inside. Once they touch the wall, they'll start to go round in circles, and this will lead to root-bound plants. But in this method, as the roots reach the end of the block and it touches the air, it will stop growing and signal the plant to produce more roots. This will result in more stable and healthier plants. The next advantage is almost connected to the point that I said earlier. This will give less transplant shock to the seedlings. The seedlings grown in these containers will be root bound, and we have to wiggle them in order to take them out and spread the roots a little bit before transplanting them to the final spot. This will create shock for the young seedlings. But with this method, transplanting is much easier. You just pick a block and put it in the final spot, and that's it. You don't disturb the roots at all. Depending on the size of the block that you're using, you might have to do an intermediate up potting. Means if you start in a smaller pot, we usually pot them up in the bigger pot before we can put it into the final spot. This is because of the weather. We need to wait until the last frost. So in between, we might have to up pot them in case the pot is too small for them. The same way, if the blocks are too small for them, we might have to put them in a bigger block. But I'm using here a medium-sized mold. I hope that I will not have to up pot them before I can transplant them to the ground. But let's see. Now let's get into the materials that are required for this process. For this method, you basically need is a soil mix and the mold that I showed you before. That's all that you need. Let us first talk about the soil mix. From my research, I found that any kind of soil medium should work for this method, but I would refrain from using the normal potting mix that you get from the garden store because they are rich in fertilizers. And at this stage of sowing seeds, the seeds don't require that much fertilizer for germination or growing as a thin seedling. In fact, they say that the fertilizers can sometimes hinder the seeds from germinating. So try to get a seed starting mix which is readily available in all the garden centers at this time of the year. I make my own soil mix by mixing homemade compost and coco pit in almost 1:1 ratio. I also add a bit of vermiculite to the mix for drainage. And I'm planning to use the same mix for all the seed starting. I've used the same thing for winter sowing. I'm using it for starting the seeds in containers and also soil blocks, and we'll see what happens. Next, let's talk about the soil blocker. I got the soil blocker from Amazon. This was the one with the most review and also an economic option. So I went for it, not sponsored. And this one is a medium-sized one, which is like 5 centimeter by 5 centimeter in size. In inches, it would be 2 inch by 2 inch. This mold is available in different sizes, starting from I think 1 centimeter onwards. Usually, gardeners start their seedlings in 1 inch or 2.5 centimeter size blocks and then uppot them as the seedlings grow. This makes totally sense to me, but I didn't want to invest in a lot of soil blockers without knowing if it would work in my setup, so I went for a medium-sized one. The soil blocker also makes small dent on top of the block where the seeds can go in, and this is made by these black molds that you see inside of this blocker, and there are different kinds of molds available, so it comes along with the package. Because some seeds like beans need larger dent, the others might need smaller dents like snapdragons or the brassicas, which are smaller seeds. This blocker also comes with a seed dispenser where you put in all the seeds inside this, and there's a small hole here which lets a single seed at a time. I don't think this will be of much use for me because I have a small garden and I need a few seedlings, but I can imagine if you have a large land and you need thousands of seedlings, this could be practical. The link to the soil blocker that I have bought will be in the description below. Next, for this setup, you will need a tray and a watering can to keep the blocks moist. So that's it with the introduction. Now let's start with the soil blocking process. Let us first start by moistening the soil. This is the most important step. So the soil needs to be more wet than the usual method of starting them in containers, because there the containers will hold the soil, but here the soil blocks has to hold on to itself with the water content in them. They say that it should feel like a wet brownie batter, not too dry and not too soupy as well. So I think that's enough. We could make some molds with it. Let's try making some soil blocks. I'm using the small mold to create the dent because my seeds are all small, which I need to sow today. What we have to do is we pack in the soil, move the mold a little bit to all the sides, press it down firmly on the tray and release it. So this is my first try. 2 of them came perfectly well. As you can see here, it has a small dent and it is holding very well. But the ones that are on the end did not have a dent and it's just a cube of soil. So I think I have to pack in a little bit more soil onto the side to get that perfect. So what I'll do is I'll keep them back to the container and try it again. Towards the end of the mix, there was a lot of water, so I just added some more soil mix and trying out the final batch. As you can see, each block has a dent where the seeds can go. I'm sowing a lot of seeds today. We could leave the dent open or cover it with soil. That is optional, they say. I'm going to slightly cover it with the soil itself. We could also use vermiculite to cover up the dents. If you have watched my previous videos, I have also started some seeds on tissue paper towel to germinate them faster. So I'm going to transfer some of the sprouted seedlings also to these soil blocks. With this method, the labeling is not that easy. I'm still using the plastic ones that I have, but I've not inserted it into the block because it might break the blocks apart. Usually what people do is they write on a tape and stick it onto the sides of the tray. But I think I'm going to use these plastic sticks itself because that's what I have, and it seems to work because I don't have that many seeds to sow. All the soil blocks where the pre-sprouted seeds are sown or planted are kept under the Growlights because they need light at this stage, and the ones that have seeds sown in them are kept under a humidity dome because they need temperature to germinate. Since the soil is exposed a lot, I'm keeping yellow sticky traps to catch the fungus gnats. After sowing them, it is important to keep the soil blocks always moist. Misting them might help, but bottom watering is the best so that they don't fall apart during the watering. I'll keep a check on them every day, and if the color of the soil changes to brown, it means that they require water. Then just add some water to the bottom of the tray and the blocks will wick the water up and stay moist. The rest of the water can be drained out. And that's it. No extra waste, just the seeds and the soil doing their thing. Seems complicated. It is a little complicated, I feel. It clearly has some advantages as we talked about in the beginning of this video, like it is good for the environment, there is less wastage, it requires less space. But I feel there is a learning curve to get a hang of this method. The moisture that has to be maintained in the soil is different. The watering schedule could be different. Transplanting this block is also a question mark which I have to figure out along the way. The labeling was not as straightforward as I thought, but I feel a bit tired right now after making all these soil blocks. I was doing this on the floor. If I was able to do it on the table, it would have been much more easier, I feel. Yeah, today I chose the floor instead of the table, so maybe that was also making it difficult to make the blocks. So for me, I need to practice it to make it work in my small garden setup, but I clearly see some potential. This method is used by farmers with acres of land who needs thousands of seedlings. Whether this method would work in my small garden setup is something that we have to figure out. If you are a total beginner, I wouldn't recommend you to start with this method because it could seem very complicated at the beginning. I would instead recommend you to invest in a Growlight in case if you are living in a cold country like me, or in a good quality potting mix. That should bring a lot of result for you in the beginning. If you have tried soil blocking, let me know your tips in the comments below. I'll definitely update you about this method in the upcoming videos. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in the next. Bye and take care.